Hi, I'm your Scream Queen Poppy and welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about a film called The Platform 2, also known as El Hoyo 2. This film is a sequel to The Platform or El Hoyo, which came out in 2019. The sequel came out in 2024, it's 101 minutes long and it is rated an 18, so just beware when you watch this for yourself. Some trigger warnings for this film include violence, injury detail, threats, cannibalism and mentions of SA. A quick summary for this film. As a mysterious leader imposes their reign over the prison, eating from the wrong plate is now a death sentence. How far would you be willing to go to save your own life? This film was written by, and please bear with me, David De Sola, Pedro Rivero, Igoitz Moreno, and Galder Gaztulu Urrutia. I'm really sorry if I mispronounced any of those names. It was also directed by Galder Gaztulu Urrutia. Some cast mentions include Milena Smith, Hovik Kuchkarian, Natalia Dina, and Oscar Jenada. And at the time of filming this, there isn't very much information on the box office for the film yet. Before we delve into this one too much, I do want to say that I have covered the first film over on my channel, short form and long form. So if you haven't seen the original film, go and watch my cover of that before you get into this. Now let's get into the plot. So The Platform is a vertical self-management centre, a dystopian prison consisting of 333 levels with a hole in the centre which allows a platform of food to descend once a day to each floor. Upon entering the prison, each inmate is allowed to pick one dish to be added to the feast that the platform brings down every day. Those on the higher levels have first access to the banquet, while those below are at risk of starvation. Once a month, prisoners are knocked out with gas and they are allocated to a new cell. And this cell could be higher, could be lower, so every month you're at risk of a better or worse situation. So this film starts with two new cellmates. We have Zemetian and Perampion. Perampion? I'm really sorry if I mispronounce any of these names. And their chosen food items are pizza and ham croquettes. To begin, they awake on level 24, which is a great start. It's a great level to be on. They're quickly introduced to the social dynamics of the prison by an inmate on level 23, Robespierre. The prisoners themselves have created their own system that ensures all floors should have their allocated food. These prisoners are called loyalists. Loyalists only eat their assigned dish, or they can agree to trade between themselves with other loyalists. So even if your dish has been soiled or eaten by the time the platform reaches you, as a loyalist, you must not eat from anyone else's dishes. You just gotta hope that tomorrow your food comes down intact. But obviously this is unlikely to happen. And the prisoners who disobey these rules are labelled as barbarians. Barbarians eat whatever they can get their hands on, as much as they can get their hands on. They're seen as selfish because they are allowing the people below them to not receive their food and potentially risk starvation. As time passes, tensions escalate when the prisoners above are eating the food meant for other inmates, including Zemetian, whose pizza is being soiled or eaten every single day. Something to note about Zemetian is that he's very particular. His one request was that he definitely would get his allocated pizza every day. He ate pizza every day outside of prison and he wasn't going to stop now. And he's very particular about this. So when he is not receiving his food, he quickly becomes angry and less agreeable to the rules that the prisoners are trying to impose upon him. At a certain point, a violent conflict breaks out above them, which results in injuries and death. Perampion and Robespierre fight to protect their level to maintain the order, but Zemetian is not keen on fighting, so he takes a step back and allows them to kind of do the dirty work. Once they've got everything in hand and one of the ne'er-do-wells has been captured and restrained, they are told about the Master, or also known as the Messiah. It's a myth within the prison about a man who allegedly survived a whole month without food through meditation and by sacrificing his own leg to feed himself and the others on the floors below him, essentially becoming a martyr. A living martyr? His followers are called the Anointed Ones, and they spread his message of solidarity throughout the prison. Robespierre then descends on the platform with the man they've captured, who's been apprehended for killing his cellmate. He states that he's bringing the man down to one of the Anointed Ones to face justice. And then he's gone. The following days, Zemetian has been starving, so when he finally gets his pizza, he doesn't just stop there, and he does start eating from the plates of the deceased inmates who were above him. This is also breaking one of the rules. You're not supposed to eat the food from a deceased cellmate because that disrupts the order. If the inmates below know there's spare food, they are going to eat over their designated portions, and it's going to cause chaos. So when a cellmate dies, you are meant to put their food in the waste, in the disposal, so that no one else can eat it. And that is how they plan to help maintain the order. For the remainder of the month, Zemetian and Perempion become very close. They share their dishes, they share stories, and they form a really nice, wholesome friendship. Zemetian explains he has a background in mathematics, but he became disillusioned. The reason he became disillusioned is because of one specific maths problem, the square root of -1. This is a maths problem where the answer is technically an imaginary number, and the fact that it is not a solid, definitive answer, which is kind of the point of maths, which I very much understand. I used to like maths in school because there was always a definitive answer. Other subjects, you can have answers in different forms and different explanations, but maths, there is one right answer. This defies his perception of what maths is, which is why he becomes disillusioned. In return, Perempion vaguely discusses her past, which involves her ex-partner and his child, who had been seriously injured on one of her art pieces and he had died. That night the gas comes in and they pass out. The next morning they awake on a new level, and they awake on 180, which is quite low down. They're there for weeks and no food reaches their level. They are not getting fed at all. And Zemetian becomes quite ill, so Perempion is trying to help take care of him as the days go by. She's trying to keep him comfortable, and while he's lying sick in bed and she is tending to him, the inmates above are passing down news and gossip, which they do when they get it, but it takes a while to filter down. A part of the news was that someone on level 24 had eaten the food of a fallen comrade. They didn't know this, but obviously Zemetian and Perempion know that it was Zemetian. One night he awakens and goes to stand by the hole. He's wrapped in a blanket and is messing around with a lighter that belonged to one of the inmates above him who had died. Perempion wakes up confused and she confronts him, but he explains that he can't keep going with the knowledge that he had broken the rules and potentially led to what he's going through for someone else. He feels so guilty for having eaten the extra food and that it could have caused someone to suffer like the way he's suffering. So he sacrifices himself. He sets himself on fire and he jumps down the hole. His burning body plummets below, and as it falls, he collides with the edges of the platform and parts of him break off, landing on levels below them. While this is obviously a horrible scene to watch, the inmates below are actually celebrating. He's essentially fed them like the master had sacrificed himself to feed the people below him. So through his martyring, he has now fed people below him and stopped them from starving to death. He also does this to help protect Perempion, as she was likely going to be punished for harbouring him after he broke the rules. The next month, Perempion awakes on a new level, level 51. She also has a new cellmate, a woman called Sahabat. Sahabat is missing an arm, and she goes on to tell her harrowing experience of the Anointed Ones, specifically about a brutal leader named Dagan Babi. He is systematically slaughtering barbarians throughout the prison. She explains that he had punished her and her cellmate after they had broken some of the rules. He had cut off Sahabat's arm, and she goes on to explain that her cellmate was stripped and tied to the platform, and then the platform was lowered to the cells below. She was left at the mercy of those below her, which obviously hints at connotations of essay of violence and abuse. And Sahabat ends her story by saying that she was forced to watch as the inmates below ate her cellmate alive. But during the scrap, her cellmate had managed to blind Dagan Babi and gouge out both of his eyes. As he was blinded, he now travels with a band of followers who act on his behalf. So even though he cannot see, he is still very much in charge and very much imposing rule. A few days later, there's an incident on a level below them where there are some barbarians who are breaking the rules. Both women decide they want to partake in a ritual where if there are barbarians below you, the 2 floors above will travel down together to essentially beat sense into the barbarians and try and force them to comply, and if they don't, they will be punished. But the girls are too high up and the floors below try to argue that they shouldn't be getting involved, but the women don't leave them much of a choice. They travel down with 3 cellmates from the 2 floors below and a fight ensues. Once the fight is over, the 2 women are now stuck on a lower level with another man, where they're forced to try and sleep and recover on this level. While the man sleeps, Sahabat reveals to Perempuan a plan of how she's going to try and escape. The plan is to fake their own deaths using an oil painting that one of the inmates somewhere in the prison has in their cell as their chosen item. The paint on the painting is toxic and if consumed can be fatal. So she's hoping to ingest some of the paint, pass away and then be disposed of, and through the disposal of her body she can try and escape. And Perempuan isn't given much of a choice because they receive word that Dag and Barbie is now travelling down on the platform in search of barbarians. They prepare for the discourse and try and arm themselves, and when the large group arrives on the platform, it's Dag and Barbie and his followers, along with the cellmates that had been on the floors below the girls. They and the other inmates are interrogated by Dag and Barbie and told that they're each going to receive punishments of varying degrees. They tell Perempuan that they're going to take one of her arms, and they tell Sahabat that she's going to receive the same punishment as her former cellmate. Perempuan and one other inmate are laid down with their arms stretched across the hole so that when the platform descends, it will tear their arms off, which it does. And it's not a very nice scene to watch, but it's made worse when they then strip Sahabat and tie her spread eagle to the top of the platform. They then let the platform descend, and you're left to imagine the horrific types of abuse she's going to suffer at the hands of the people below her, which thankfully were not shown in graphic detail. I mean, just the implication is kind of horrible enough. The next month, a traumatised Perempuan awakes on level 72 with a new cellmate. A very familiar cellmate if you've seen the first film. We have Trimagasi back in action. Trimagasi was one of the main characters from the first film, so we already kind of have a whole history for his character. He's given us backstories, he's told us why he's in the prison, and he's told us about his time in the prison so far and what he's been forced to have to do due to how dire it can be on the lower levels, insinuating he had eaten someone but had never killed anyone. He'd eaten a body that had fallen onto his level. If you've seen my first video, we love Trimagasi over here. He's a fun character and he brings a light-hearted element to the film, although we know from the first film that he can and will take very dire action when needed. After her trauma, Perempuan is very clearly disillusioned with the leader and the anointed ones and the whole imposed rule on prisoners. So disillusioned with the loyalists, she talks to Trimagasi and together they recruit a group of barbarians. This group is going to demand change from the loyalists. They want more food, better conditions. So she travels down with Trimagasi on the platform and they talk to the people below, and more people come and join them on the platform until you can barely contain the amount of people standing on this platform. And another reason she's doing this is to try and travel through the prison to find the painting that Sahabat had talked about. They eventually stop on a floor and decide to make this floor their home. But very soon after, Dag and Barbie catches wind of what they're doing, travels down to the floor above them and stops. He speaks down to them and threatens the group with starvation, stating that they will stop all food from reaching their level so the group will starve. But the barbarians kind of rile each other up. So they come up with a really fun idea that, okay, if you're going to starve us, we're going to go down and eat the loyalists. We're going to eat your followers. If you're not going to let us eat, we're going to eat the people who worship you. And they do. I think they live there for most of a month. You can see them barbecuing people. So at a certain point they have got their hands on loyalists and they have very much kept their word. They are cannibalising people down there. After a certain amount of time, Dag and Barbie and his followers come down to their cell and a massive fight breaks out between the groups. It's a really brutal fight actually, and basically everyone dies in this fight apart from Perempuan and Trimagasi, who both hide and manage to wait out the fight until they're the only ones left alive. Luckily, one of the people who she had banded with was the owner of the painting she'd been looking for. And now, with it just being her and Trimagasi, she was finally able to put a plan into action. She tells Trimagasi what the plan is and asks him if he wants to join in, but oh so lovingly he informs her that this has been the best month of his life, which, after seeing the kind of absolute depravity he was very much causing, gives us a wider indication into his character, and that he'd very much been lying in the first film, and he enjoyed the chaos and he enjoyed the killing and he enjoyed eating people. So, you know, that best month of his life was just filled with torture and death and cannibalism, and the man loves it. So she is quite content to leave Trimagasi to his own thing. She then eats a portion of the painting and quite swiftly passes out. When she wakes up, the vertical prison is now on its side. It's now horizontal. And there are people in hazmat suits floating around. It seems like there's no gravity in this prison, or there's something that's just making everything float. And they are going through the prison collecting bodies. She is tied to a bundle of corpses, a massive bundle of corpses, which is being pushed towards the bottom of the prison to the lowest level, which is called the pit. Sahabat had indicated she believed that they were going to go back towards the top, which would lead for an easier escape. But when she realises she's going down and sees level 333, she starts to panic. And here, Perempuan shockingly discovers that the facility is keeping children in the pit as a means to manipulate the prisoners, using them as false symbols of hope to prevent the prisoners trying to escape themselves. This is touched on in the first film when Goreng tries to save the little girl that he finds. And through the platform too, we're shown images of children in almost a cult-like setting, as well as groups of what you're meant to believe are almost like mutant people living in this pit below the prison. They send a boy to level 333 and tie him down to the bed. She sees this all happening, so tries to rescue the boy when the people in the hazmat suits leave. But due to this strange gravity, she fails and she quite horrendously hits her head a few times and passes out. They are now stuck on the lowest level, so she then takes the child onto the platform and travels down into the pit, where she is shown a massive group of people who help her off the platform to send the child up as a message of hope. Here we find that this has been an underground society of people living here for God knows how long, and you are then witness to more and more prisoners coming down every month on the platform with a child, sometimes without, but different prisoners, different children. How long has this been going on for? And eventually we see Goreng come down with the child from the first film. Goreng is helped off the platform and introduced to the same society of people as the child is sent back up. Perempuan then goes over to Goreng and we find out that they were the couple. He was her ex, the one with the child, and they are reunited in the pit. And that's the end of this film. So let's discuss some of the themes of this film. It's a thriller sci-fi, but is obviously very much a horror. I get the thriller aspects of it completely, but I definitely think this falls more into horror than it does thriller, especially after its predecessor. We also have themes of cannibal horror, obviously, as well as themes of body horror due to torture. So a bit different than regular body horror, but the things that are done to the people in this film are just horrendous. And obviously there's some scenes that I haven't mentioned because they're not super prevalent to the plot, but please be warned that this has some really violent scenes that even turn me off a little bit. Also, obviously, we have themes of classism, almost even more so than the first film, because this is where they're imposing their own kind of reign and rules on each other. When looking up this film online as well, there's a lot of people making a comparison to with the themes of this film and how the society was during with the distancing and kind of the chain. I've got to say it's not a theme I would necessarily jump to make, you know, that connection myself, but I do understand where the people are coming from with this idea. Script-wise, it's fine. It does a good job to convey the message, but it also could be considered a little tedious at times. Some scenes just go on for too long. They're a little too descriptive, or just bits that don't necessarily actually further the plot. That being said, the script actually for me raised more questions than it gave answers, which was a little bit annoying. Plot-wise, I think the plot of this film is so drastically different to its predecessor. I think the first film had a really crystal clear plot. It laid out all the barbarity of the film in a really good way. I loved how the first film worked, but this film was so different because although it is a sequel, it's the Platform 2, it's technically a prequel / happening at the same time as the first film. As the film goes on, you're introduced to characters from the first film from their previous months in the prison to then when we saw them. This film tries to give the first film more of a setup, which it does. But I actually learned more researching this film online after watching it than I actually gained from watching the film myself. I finished the film and had so many questions that I had to read the plot online in more depth to understand what I'd seen. It also pushes the violence and gore way more than the first film did, and the first film was brutal and gory. And it also did it in ways that I, at times, struggled to watch, particularly the scenes that involved stripping and tying the inmates to the platform to just be at the mercy of the people below. I think the connotations of what was going to happen to them, specifically being women, made it a very difficult film to watch for me. Talking about the acting, I think the actors did a fantastic job, just like the first one. They convey vastly different characters who all have detailed backstories and personalities and conflict and interact in such different ways. They're all very believable characters. I think the actors all did a wonderful, wonderful job. And also, the depth of the characters makes it really easy to get attached to them. For example, Zam was a big favourite of mine, and he turned out to be one of the sweetest guys, and I was really quite upset with what happened to him. But obviously, it then furthered the plot. And something you don't really expect from the Platform is its comedy and light-hearted moments. I know I mentioned this when talking about the first film, and again, I talk about this a lot when I talk about films. You need some light-hearted moments just to cut through the tension. And I think it also makes the darker scenes seem so much darker. It was absolutely depraved at times. Some bits were hard to watch, but there were cute little moments and nice little moments in amongst all the madness. Cinematography wise, it's very fitting. The film's as dark audio and visually as the plot is. There was some really great camera work and some fantastic shots and angles, and the dark tones and colours, bless you, and the dark tones and colours just added to the story. Also talking about the shots of the children being kind of raised and harvested underground in the prison basement, that brought up so many questions, but at the same time, it was really artfully shot. Like, it was actually quite a good scene to watch. Talking about gore, we know from the first film it was unexpectedly gory, which kind of leads us, sadly, to expect it in the sequel. And it definitely gave. It overdid it on the gore. At times it was just grotesque to where it feels like it was maybe just for shock value. And I think the gore in the first film added to the plot and made you kind of feel aghast when you're watching it. Whereas because we knew what was coming, I feel like they thought they had to kind of overdo what they did in the first film to make us even more shocked. Which is fine. Like, I love a gory film. And the gore was good. It was just too much at times. Talking about revolution in this film, the themes of revolution. The concept of revolution in this film is in direct alignment with the concept of classism in the first film. So where we still get elements of classism in this film, it's almost overwhelmed by just the revolution that's going on amongst the inmates. The revolution was meant to free them from a violent dictatorship from the master, from Doug and Barbie and the other anointed ones. And regardless of the good intent of the loyalists, and regardless of the good intent she had to try and put a stop to this, that led to the further depravity depicted in the first film. So the lack of rules and the lack of restraint in the first film was directly caused by the actions of the inmates in this film. It indicates that the revolution did nothing to improve the life of the prisoners, which mirrors how Goreng's message meant nothing, as it was the administration farming these children for exactly that purpose, which is not something you're privy to when watching the first film. So it almost makes the first film feel pointless, but not pointless as in it should have been made, pointless as in everything, all the hardships that Goreng and everyone go through in the first film, it was all for nothing. Because so many inmates had done it before him, and I guess you're left to assume that so many will still be doing it after Goreng. Is the plot believable? No, of course it isn't. This film was a lot more fantasy based than its predecessor, in my opinion. It was medieval levels of torture and punishments, and this normalisation of cannibalism, when the first film had made a point to show you just how depraved it was that people had been led to do this, it's been so normalised in this film that it made it less believable. Not that it was a believable plot to begin with, but I like to think that things can be believable inside of the film. And I think that because of what we knew from the first film, in this film you almost feel like you've been lied to a little bit. Now let's talk about some pros and cons. Pro-wise, good gore, and I love being made uncomfortable by horror, so it did a really good job of doing that. I also love all the character cameos from the first film. We got to see Tormagasi, Baharat, Goreng. We got to see, I can never remember her name, Inaguri. And I thought that was just a fun little element that you got to see them again. And obviously the good characterisation as well. I will gush about the characterisation of all the characters in the platform forever. They're fantastic. Con-wise, my biggest and most annoying con for this film is that it leaves you with more questions than answers. You have questions after the first film that you hope the sequel is going to elaborate on. But if anything, it not only didn't answer those questions, it gave you a list of new ones, and that annoys me. I also think that the sheer violence for the sake of violence, I think violence in horror needs to be poignant. Unless you're specifically going to watch a gory slasher, if you're going to watch something with any semblance of a deep plot, I think the violence needs to mark, pointed, big plot points. But the violence that was just prevalent through the entire film made it tedious at times to watch. And also, while it can't always be helped, I think that the indications on allowance of SA in this film really saddened me. There was mentions and hints to it in the first film, and sometimes I think the implications are enough. And while they didn't graphically show you anything, I think just hearing the descriptions of what they were doing kind of churned my stomach a little bit. It wasn't very nice. I mean, it's not meant to be nice, but on top of everything else, you don't need to throw SA in as well, Talking about some similar films, the revolution aspects of this film really reminded me of Civil War from 2024. I think revolution often is violent, which, is indicated in a lot of media. And I think those two films just kind of butt heads a little bit for me in that regard. The sheer type of violence and gore in this film is so specific. Really reminded me of American Horror Story, but specifically Roanoke. If you've seen Roanoke, you'll know what I mean. It's really consistent, violent, brutal gore that at times might be a little too much, although I love that in Roanoke. But yeah, the sheer violence and gore really remind me of Roanoke. And I think some of the more cult-like aspects in terms of having, the Master or the Messiah and his anointed ones really reminds me in a really weird way of Red State from 2011, where they're just ruthlessly following a leader no matter what type of violence it's going to cause to your own people. Let's talk about some of the ratings for this film. So, this was not a very well-received film. I think people had enjoyed the first film so much that this kind of felt almost like a bit of a letdown compared to the first film. Rotten Tomatoes gave this a 3.5 out of 10, and the audience gave it a 2.5 out of 10, so some very low scores for this film. And truthfully, while I understand why, it's not the worst film in the world. It's still very well made. It had a decent budget. The acting was really good. The script wasn't bad, and the plot was there. But I don't hate this film, and I think my love for the first film means I'm going to have a little love towards any of its sequels regardless. I just really wish it had cleared more stuff up. So I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10, which I think is quite generous, but I don't want to give it more than that. And that's today's film. So if you've seen it, leave me a comment, let me know what you thought of the sequel compared to the first film. I'm really interested to know what you think. If you haven't seen it and you haven't seen the first one, go and watch them. Come back and let me know what you think. And like I said earlier, I have covered the first film over on my channel already. So if you don't want to watch it for yourself, that is understandable. Go and watch my videos and I talk about the plot in depth, and it'll hopefully make you understand this a bit more if you've not seen the first film. If you like this video, please give it a like, leave me a comment, let me know what you think. And I'm so excited to continue discussing more and more films with you. So if you've got any recommendations or anything you'd like me to cover, let me know, and subscribe for more because I can't stop and I'm so excited to keep talking to you guys. So thank you so much for watching. Have a great night and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.